Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I'm joined by Congressman Mike Gallagher. He sits on the Armed Services Committee. He is himself a Marine. And first, we have to get through some tiresome Packer chatter. They've been elevated, basically catapulted by the NFL into the finals of the NFC because I don't know why. Everybody likes a small town in Wisconsin, I guess. The refs were clearly in the bag for them. And Mike, are you taking joy in this? I assume.
I'm just wondering when the Browns are playing this weekend.
We will be there next year with Kevin Stefanski. We are relaunching our analytics-driven, as the military should, going completely analytics-driven. We'll be there next year.
I've heard that from you for the last 4 years, Hugh. And so hope springs eternal.
Kevin Stefanski's the man, and I am very convinced he really is. But now let me get to something serious, because you're a Marine, and I have not talked to you since this happened. Iran fired volley after volley of ballistic missiles at al-Assad, where we had at least 1,500 and as many as 5,000 American troops and allied troops. They did not kill anyone. They did not wound anyone because our troops dispersed and got into tunnels. But that was an extraordinary moment that was only a week ago, and it did not come up in the Democratic debate. Number one, how important was that moment? Number two, are you shocked that the Democrats didn't even discuss it?
Well, I spent 7 months on al-Assad in 2007 when I deployed, and I thought it was an extraordinary moment for two reasons. Really, one, that the strike came from Iran itself, which was significant, but two, that there were no casualties. Now, the best reporting, the best information we have available suggests that was deliberate on the Iranians' part. It's my belief that had they tried to maximize casualties, we could have seen something far more horrific, but we should thank God that no one was killed. But I think it's evidence that in this case, deterrence held. It worked. The Iranians clearly understood that President Trump's red line is the death of Americans, that we will strike back aggressively if you kill Americans. And indeed, President Trump did strike back aggressively in killing Qasem Soleimani. And I think that was a masterstroke. It is impossible really to underestimate how important Soleimani was for Iran's terror threat network. It has set off a wave of protests within Iran. Indeed, the media told us for a week that this would unite the Iranians against us. Instead, it's just united the Iranians in opposition to their own regime. But also think about the wave of recrimination it's going to set off within the Iran national security apparatus. In other words, they now know that they're penetrated, right? That somehow we got intelligence on Soleimani that led us to conduct this strike. So there's going to be a lot of anxiety, a lot of people looking over their shoulder, and I think we've dealt a really significant blow to the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism. The fact that it didn't come up in a serious way in the debate just shows you that none of the Democrats are serious when it comes to foreign policy. Indeed,
you said something which I have been suspecting as a civilian with no access to anything. It just seems to me we must have a mole inside the Iranian government. And maybe someone wanted Soleimani out of the way because he was clearly the number two and clearly had the ear of the supreme leader, the Khamenei. They've just got to be on a witch hunt over there internally as to who leaked to us all their stuff.
And let me be clear, I'm not basing that off any classified intel that I've been given. That's just my sort of logical deduction. And also there's an Israeli think tank who's done a great analysis of this, and just based on their knowledge of how the Iranians operate. And so, again, Soleimani was irreplaceable in many ways. But, let's be honest, we have our work cut out for us. We have a chance, but that's all that is, to drive a wedge between the Iranian people and the Iranian regime. And for the last 2 years, the Iranian people have been risking their lives to come to the streets of Tehran to demonstrate against their regime. I think President Trump's tweets, his messaging has been great in terms of supporting the Iranian people. The fact that we've heard nothing from the Democratic presidential candidates or any Democrats, the fact that this week, 2 days ago, the Democrats voted against a non-objectionable resolution showing support for the Iranian people shows you how unserious they have become and how politicized an issue that shouldn't be political has become. The only negative thing I would point out here, Hugh, and it was the subject of my remarks at the Surface Navy Association yesterday, is that, as I alluded to, I do think if the Iranians had wanted to inflict casualties, particularly on our static bases like al-Assad, though it's an Iraqi base technically, they could have done so. I mean, look at what we've seen in the last few months. The Iranians conducted a highly sophisticated yet asymmetric attack against the Abqaiq and Khurais oil facilities in Saudi Arabia that totally eluded the Patriot batteries that were in near proximity. We had al-Shabaab militants, small numbers of them, kill 3 Americans and disable multi-million-dollar aircraft. We've seen a variety of attacks like this in Afghanistan, which show that a lot of our fixed positions are vulnerable to relatively cheap and unsophisticated rocket attacks by our enemies. And so we need to think hard. If we're that vulnerable in a theater that is less of a priority against adversaries that are less sophisticated, how vulnerable are we in the priority theater where we have a far more sophisticated adversary in China, and that is Indo-PACOM?
That is a good word. I also have to point out to people that Iran has provided the predicate for striking their nuclear facilities. They have demonstrated a willingness to launch from their land against those they consider to be their opponents missile technology that they already have. Whether or not they can obtain nuclear weapons will change the entire strategic equation. And I think their willingness to do what they did, launch from Iran ballistic missiles, means that when and if a strike has to occur on Iran's nuclear facilities, they will have provided the first exhibit as to why.
And I think this is what the president was getting at when we had this whole cultural sites messaging. I don't think the president was talking about bombing mosques. I think he was merely signaling to the Iranians that their nuclear facilities, regardless of where they're hidden, are on the table should they escalate further. And indeed, the Iranians have gotten the message: do not escalate, do not kill Americans. The other thing I'd add to this, Hugh, is that I know there are a lot of people in our party, but they're joined on the far left, who want to reduce our presence everywhere around the world, particularly in the Middle East. I do think over time we will have to have what I would call an economy of force effort in the Middle East, in CENTCOM, while we shift our more important assets to Indo-PACOM, to the Pacific, to counter China. But the best way to do that is to have a credible military deterrent in the Middle East so we can safeguard our interests, however narrowly we define them. And this is the first time in the last 2 decades where we are combining a credible military deterrent with maximum economic pressure. And I believe that gives us the best possibility of preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon.
Now, Congressman Gallagher, I have to switch while I've got you. You mentioned the Surface Navy Association. I talked about that with General Deptula, an Air Force general, earlier today, because the CNO, Michael Gilday, went there and he said, I want to distill this for the public. The Navy needs a lot more money. You're asking us to do way more than we have the budget for. We've got to raise what they call the top line. That is the aggregate amount of money that the Navy gets for shipbuilding, and not by a little amount, by a lot. It was a bold throwdown by the CNO, backed up by Secretary of the Navy, Modly. What did you make of that speech?
Well, I thought it was a great speech. He was also wearing the new SWO black leather jacket. I'm going to need you to conduct a Twitter poll as to whether we like the fact that SWOs are now allowed to wear leather jackets.
I know some pilots who do not think this is a good move.
I think they may be right about that, but you got to let the Navy nerds have their fun. But I think the CNO gave a great speech, and Acting Secretary Modly has been right on this from his first memo, his SecNav Vector 1. I would also recommend SecNav Vector 6, which I think is the best thing I have ever seen written making the case for a 355-ship Navy, and it's 2.5 pages. So senior Navy leadership now seems to be on the same page in saying we have to substantially and rapidly grow the fleet and provide more resources to the naval capabilities that most directly support the national defense strategy's objectives. That's what my speech was all about yesterday, trying to make the case for why sea power plays a unique and more important role in bringing the national defense strategy to life than, for example, does land power. But, however, Hugh, it is not enough just to say 355, we need more ships, we need more ships. The Navy needs to tell us how it, in concert with the Marine Corps, as an integrated naval force, what it's going to do with that money. What does that fleet look like, and what is the point of it all? How are we going to counter China? And I think we have an opportunity, particularly since we are no longer bound by the restrictions of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, to do some really creative stuff, such as scattering small teams of Marines around the first island chain and in the littorals, small boats armed with long-range missiles. You can imagine anti-ship missiles on Mark 6 patrol boats. We can get really creative here and have an integrated naval force whose sole mission in life is to complicate the Chinese Communist Party's decision-making cycle. And again, this is the priority theater, and it's going to be the Navy and the Marine Corps who are the priority force, and we have to make the case for that. So I applaud the CNO, I applaud the acting secretary, and I hope the White House will decisively adjudicate whatever remaining disputes exist between the Pentagon and OMB on this issue.
Now I want to read to the audience just a portion of what the CNO said yesterday. Quote, "To accomplish our goals, we recommend an average ship procurement budget increase of $7 billion per year over the next 8 years. That would fund the additional shipbuilding program proposed here, including the purchase of an additional carrier, and cover the initial Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine replacement. We also recommend an average increase in aviation procurement of $3.5 billion over the next 8 years to address the strike fighter shortfall and reintroduce a robust long-range strike capability in the carrier air wing. These new ships and aircraft will necessitate a change in the Navy's operation and maintenance budget, which should rise from its present $48.4 billion to $57 billion. Increased personnel costs must be factored in as well, netting an $8.2 billion per year increase by the end of President Trump's second term. Overall, the Navy budget we propose would rise from $160 billion to just over $190 billion by fiscal year 2024." End quote. I 100% support this, Mike Gallagher. Do you?
I 100% support it. But I also think we need to call out what the Commandant of the Marine Corps is doing. In other words, your naval services are not just saying, give us more of everything. They're also starting, for the first time in a long time, to say there are some legacy capabilities, old capabilities, that we no longer need, where we can actually save money because we're in a different fight, a different environment, right? We're not doing ground counterinsurgency operations in the Middle East. We're doing sea denial in Indo-PACOM, in the first island chain, in its associated seas and littorals. Therefore, we need different things. So, for example, massive L-class amphibious ships do not make sense for that situation. And what the Commandant is saying is we should no longer plan our entire Marine Corps force around the assumption of forced amphibious entry. And so there are areas where we can actually save money by shedding ourselves of useless legacy capabilities and investing in new capabilities like intermediate range missiles that are way cheaper than some of the things we've bought in the past. So, again, I applaud the CNO. I applaud the acting secretary. I applaud the Commandant of the Marine Corps. I think we have the right team in place. Now we just need the support of Congress. We need the support of the White House. We know the National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, believes in this stuff to his core. He's been one of the most aggressive proponents of building the Navy. So I think we're headed in the right direction, but we have no time to lose because this is the third Commandant in my lifetime that has been talking about naval integration. And so if a decade from now, we're still talking about naval integration, then we will have failed.
Congressman Mike Gallagher, always a pleasure. Thank you again, and I'm glad the chatter on the Packers was limited to the top. Thank you, Congressman.